Hi, everybody. Let me call the retreat to order. And I think we should start with just a brief moment of silence for the victims and the families in Orlando, Florida. So let us just take a brief moment. We express our condolences and our prayers to them. Thank you so very much for being here. I thought we should have a quote retreat simply to discuss and share in a more informal setting what each of us wants to achieve as a board member. Obviously, we've been entrusted with an important public mission and one that is very important to Mayor Turner and to the county commissioners and the surrounding counties as well. So thank you for being here. I'm hoping we can be somewhat free form, although I certainly want to get everyone's input, and then hopefully we'll synthesize it at the end of the day and move forward and present perhaps a formal mission for the board to vote on based on the synthesis of everyone's thoughts. And also, we will learn how to maximize the contribution of each and every one of our very outstanding board members. I can't imagine there's a more outstanding board anywhere for any endeavor than this particular one. Everybody brings amazing strengths and unique talents, and it's just an honor so far to work with you. I want to thank the staff for soldiering through the weekend to get together a number of materials for the retreat, and also for helping with the slideshow, which I had made unduly complicated by wanting a bunch of layers. And then we had a software glitch, and everybody soldiered through and got it done. So thank you so much to Gabe and Sydney, and I'm missing one person, Kelly. Thank you so very much. So let me, at this point, I just thought I would give us a very brief refresher of where we are and the context in which we make our decisions, and then we have a really special video suggested by Dr. Lex Frieden. Oh, gosh. Should that work? Can you hear me? And of course, these are things you well know, but just a 5-minute refresher of sort of our history. I actually left a lot out. But as you know, we have our own tax base of a 1-cent sales tax. It was actually Senator Hutchison, whom we continue to miss to this day, who sponsored the legislation in the legislature to allow us to form Metro in 1978. And there was a referendum authorizing our sales tax. When you look at this booklet, which many of you, if not all of you, have seen, that is actually the first transit plan. Dominic had given it to me early on, and it sets forth in detail, and it's an interesting read, exactly in very granular detail, how Metro is going to establish transit for the agency with buses and every manner of transit. Just as a refresher, here are the numerous services we provide. They go beyond what most people think. The Metro Police actually has concurrent authority with the Houston Police Department, although it exercises its authority only with respect to the transit facilities. And of course, one of the things that often goes overlooked is when there's a crisis in Houston, like the recent flooding, we're all over it, not only transporting folks to evacuation facilities, but passing out water, food, helping people get to the doctor, that sort of thing. Just a brief refresher of some of the regional entities that we deal with on our mission. You might just skim through that. It's obvious, it's nothing you don't know, but actually it's not a complete list. When you look at the 80 elected officials we deal with individually who have their own agendas and own priorities, it just shows you the challenge we face when we get to developing our regional transit plan. Now let's put it in context of the area. This is the metro service area. You can see the county is in green, the unincorporated parts of the county. The Houston city is in pink. And the multi-cities there, which are listed to the right, are the area of those is shown in sort of the orange-yellow. To the right is the unincorporated area of the county that we don't represent. And that's because in the 1978 referendum, they chose not to become part of Metro. Doesn't mean, though, that they aren't part of what we have to consider when we're doing our transit plan. Here we have an overlay, and again, this turned out to be complicated, but the staff and Gabe got it done. We have an overlay of the highway system showing the activity centers, which some people call the business centers of Houston, not just the one downtown. In fact, downtown does not represent the greatest percentage of jobs. Here we have the local bus network overlaid, and the transit centers, and the park and rides, and the park and ride service. So since 1978, when we had the referendum, the prior boards and the staffs have accomplished quite a bit, as you can see. Metro Rail, that's where we have it now. We have the HOV-HOT lanes. And then, of course, we have the Metrolift service area as well. The federal government, under the legislation that Lex helped President George H.W. Bush pass, requires that you have service for the disabled community concurrent's really the wrong word, but corresponding to your local bus service. And we do that and more. Our Metrolift service area is beyond what's required by the ADA. It's a little hard to see, but the light blue, well, it's actually not hard to see. The light blue is what we do that wouldn't be required by the ADA. And, of course, there's no more important mission, really, than that. And then this gives you a thumbnail sketch of the ridership with respect to all of the different modes of transit, with the total ridership being 112 million. I stuck this slide in here because it's something very important to me in our mission, and that is in terms of enhancing the ridership experience and making transit accessible to those who need it most. We obviously need bus shelters, and we have a fraction of our stops have bus shelters, so something to look forward for the future. Just wanted to give a shout out to the prior board chairs, Gilbert, and the prior boards, some of whom are represented on the current board, most of whom really, for all of the advancements that have taken place. And obviously, part of our mission should be to include or to continue this fine record. Now, in planning our mission and vision, I think it's important to look at the context of the Metro Solutions referendum. In 2003, as you know, we went to the voters with a Metro Solutions referendum. $640 million in bonding authority was authorized. The referendum passed, and the vision of that referendum is set forth on this map. $640 million was never enough to accomplish everything, and we knew that going in. But it was really a negotiated number with the Greater Houston Partnership and certain other entities whose support we hoped to garner for the referendum to enable it to pass. They didn't want us to have too much bonding authority. They wanted us to start smaller than we would need to build out the whole system. So, and maybe look at the record of performance and see going forward what we should do. You'll notice that on this referendum, and Congressman Culberson, Mrs. Schneider is here today, part of what was supposed to happen actually in the first part of it was a corridor from downtown to Post Oak, the red from downtown to Post Oak, and then the Post Oak going up from the corner there. And as Congressman Culberson has always accurately pointed out, the line is drawn on West Park, that red line. Ultimately, with community involvement and tons of meetings, it was decided by Pryor's board and staff to run the line mostly along Richmond, or largely along Richmond. And that set up a big controversy in which, frankly, Congressman Culberson has prevailed. So, but I do point out that the original plan, at least the corridors and the directions in which we were supposed to go, whether you agree it should be on Richmond or West Park or not, show a connection between downtown and the Galleria, which I think is important that we find a way to complete one way or another. It's often said by those who disparage Metro, and as you know, we have our group out there that constantly looks to do that, although we've been very, very lucky to have mostly support from the community. But some have said, well, you know, they haven't done what they said they would do in the 2003 transit system plan. And that's just, they hadn't done anything they said they'd do. They were going to do more buses. They didn't do those, blah, blah, more parking rides. That's just false. When you look at this table, which I asked the staff to generate, we've actually gone a long way toward completing Phase 2, which was the first part in the Metro Solutions Transit Plan. We have vastly improved the bus network. We have added most of the transit centers in Vision, the park and ride lots. And you can go through that table and just see we've done a whole lot. This was Exhibit D to the Metropolitan Transit Authority Metro Solutions referendum. The starred aspects of that referendum were what were supposed to be done in the first. It's actually Phase 2 is what they call it in the Metropolitan Transit Authority referendum. Phase 1 was the line downtown, which had already been in process, the 7.5 miles. And as you can see, we've gotten everything done. Harrisburg is almost done. We're well on our way there. The West Park Wheeler Station to Hillcroft is not done. And that is because first of all, we've run out of bonding authority, but secondly, there have been delays over the years, including Congressman Culberson's insistence that it not be built along West Park. But the truth of the matter is we would have run out of money anyway to do that. We'd be having to go back to the voters. And the FTA, as you know, has now withdrawn our being in the grant line for that. So that's something, that corridor remains undone. But everything else we've gotten done. And of course, with respect to Uptown, at least an alternative is about to get done there, and that's bus rapid transit, which is there was a great article in the Chronicle really setting forth that on Saturday or Sunday. I really recommend that you read it because it explains a whole lot about that. We aren't coming up with money up front, but we are going to buy and operate the buses and do some things on the transit center, although we still have to enter into a final interlocal agreement with Uptown, and we're going to need some concessions from them to be able to move forward. But I hope we'll get those done and we'll be able to move forward with this. Now, obviously, we bear a responsibility for the region as well. And I'm just lifting out, hopefully you had a chance to skim through the HGAC Regional Transportation Plan, but every time we seek money from the federal government, we get the blessing of the HGAC. That's part of the process. So it's important to know what HGAC's goals are as well, and to consider the 8-county region that they represent. As you'll notice, though, we're a overwhelmingly important service provider. In fact, out of 84 million in annual boardings, Metro in the HGAC area accounts for 82 million. And these are just some maps that I won't burden you with talking about, but this shows the regional transit system. We need to consider bikeways, of course, when we're planning our plan and our future. Also, freight is a key part of the whole dynamic that has to be considered. And this is just a very interesting slide that shows how population is exploding from 2010 to 2040 in our region, as well as employment. So all of those are factors we have to consider as we move forward. At this point, that concludes my slide presentation, but I'm just honored to introduce a video that Lex Frieden urged us to consider at the retreat, representing the ADA and his own fine efforts in getting that passed, and Metro's history with service to the disabled community. Lex, do you want to say anything about it before we look at it?
Well, I would just say that this represents a lot of work by a lot of people, and it gives you some perspective historically of where we are, not only in terms of services to people with disabilities, but services to our community. Some of these archived videos date back to 1977. And just one quick anecdote. Mayor Hoffines, in 1976, I think, invited the community to come and ride the new city buses. Houston had just invested in vehicles to carry people through the downtown area, and he wanted people to ride it so much that he said on Saturday, all the buses are going to be free, and everybody should come and ride the bus. And in fact, he said, I'll be there at the city hall to catch the bus. And he arrived with the press at 10 o'clock on Saturday morning and was met there by about 50 people who used wheelchairs, who were there for their ride. And yet they couldn't board the bus. At least one of those people, a friend of mine, took himself out of his wheelchair and dragged himself up the steps of the bus. Another person, the bus driver, got off the bus and helped carry their wheelchair up onto the bus with them in it. The mayor said this is not what we envisioned for our city. And he directed the transit agency at that time, HUTRAN, to provide services to people with disabilities. But you'll see some of that history here. And I just, in the context of where we are today, a lot of what we're doing are not new problems. They're problems that we have been trying to solve for a long time. Some of them we've made great progress to, others are still on our agenda.
Thank you so very much. We unfortunately had to edit it down to about 10 minutes. It's about a 50-minute video, and I encourage everyone to watch the whole thing. It's very moving. Even the 10 minutes is, but the whole thing is great. So with that, we will have the video.
It began with the Vietnam veterans, the wounded among them, who refused to disappear into hospitals and nursing homes. They felt that their country owed them normal lives. They spearheaded what was to become a new movement. The new militants are the disabled citizens of America, demonstrating as best they can. Finally, on April 28, 1977, Section 504 regulations were signed. In human terms, what did the law accomplish? One of the things it did was to provide some money for projects like this one in Houston, called New Options for Independent Living. The research director is Lex Frieden, who became disabled.
I was 18 years old, and I broke my neck in an automobile accident. I was paralyzed instantly.
Lex finished college while living at home, but soon began to want a more independent way of life. Out of his need, and that of others like him, a number of institutes for independent living have come into being around the country during the last few years. Places where disabled people learn to cope with a society that was not designed for them at all.
While in some respects it might be easier to be taken care of rather than be responsible for your own life, in most respects I think handicapped people would prefer to have that responsibility, and the benefits of that justify the effort that's required to put up with the day-to-day routine kind of hassles that we all have in our lives.
Because there's steps on the bus instead of a lift. Well, I have no idea why they have a lift. They give us many reasons. They do have some with lifts, though, but 80% of them are inoperable.
If Houston had some kind of a system, a small kind of minibus that would come around like a dial-a-ride sort of thing to pick people up and then transfer them to a larger, broader system with lifts and so on, so we can get around and do work. This is the whole story.
Metro board members did an about-face when they unanimously agreed to equip all new buses with wheelchair lifts. The federal courts ruled recently that municipalities are not required to provide such a service, but an act pending before Congress that will establish accessible transit to all riders has encouraged Metro to change directions.
I think at the heart of this decision was a notion that as I said in the board meeting, that what this country really is about is the ability of all citizens to participate equally. The government's role is to give each of our citizens a chance to make that contribution of which he or she is capable, and I feel just as good as she does about it.
She is Lori Gerken, Vice President of the Coalition for Barrier-Free Living. At Metro's board meeting, they announced they were dropping their lawsuit against Metro in light of the lifts being installed.
We believe Metro's decision is an important step in the continuing effort to remove discrimination and create equal access for people with disabilities in all areas of life. Many people who have lacked access to adequate transportation will now have the opportunity to be more productive and less dependent on public support.
Disabled Americans must become full partners in America's Opportunity Society.
He was a compassionate conservative. Nobody knew what that meant. So they ran around trying to find a piece of legislation to show what he was a compassionate conservative about. And so they came up with the ADA. And that's how he actually endorsed it.
Today we will be hearing about the progressive efforts of the Houston community in promoting greater access for all citizens and the relationship between these activities and the proposals set forth in this Americans with Disabilities Act.
After years of planning, fighting, and debating, 43 million disabled Americans were given what they all along rightfully deserved, to be treated like everyone else. President George Bush signed the Americans with Disabilities Act, which eliminates a number of barriers for the disabled.
And today's legislation brings us closer to that day when no Americans will ever again be deprived of their basic guarantee of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
The new law prohibits discrimination in employment, public accommodations, transportation, and telecommunications, and it includes a variety of sanctions for violators. Dozens of Houstonians made the trip today to Washington. Lori Gerken was one.
It's costing $200 billion a year to isolate people and to keep people in institutions, and this legislation will enable us to get out into the community, to have jobs, to have access to transportation.
And so when it comes to the ADA, Houstonians have real reason to have a strong sense of Texas pride. And of course, many other Texans have played leading roles in securing equal civil rights for the disabled, and no list is complete without Justin Dart and Lex Frieden.
Each human being has an inalienable right and an inalienable responsibility to govern their own life, to participate in government of their society, and to be maximally productive.
I chaired the task force that filed suit against the city of Houston to encourage the city to order their new buses with lifts. And
what was the compelling? What moved you to that point? I mean, were you just frustrated because you'd been with this group that had been asking so long? And
yes,
finally...
I mean, for 12 years we've been trying to get the city to order buses that had lifts on them. And the city was getting ready to order 326 buses. I can't believe I remember that number, but I do. 326 buses that were going to be on the road for at least 20 years in the city of Houston. So that would have meant that 20 years there would have been buses that were inaccessible. And then after that, those buses would have gone to rural communities. And so for 20 more years, those buses would have been inaccessible.
I didn't realize that you were thinking ahead so far as to consider what happens to our disposed vehicles after they're off the streets.
That was a big decision. Yeah.
So when the Metro announced the change, were you surprised by that, or did you think it would be settled? I mean,
I thought we were going to court, and I found out the day before. The lawyer that represented us called me at home that evening and said, they've settled, they've agreed. And
it made you happy.
I was very happy, very, very, very happy.
You actually were looking for a job when you found Houston's transit issues, weren't you?
I came to Houston Metro straight out of college, graduating from the University of North Texas State back then. And so, yeah, I came looking for a job, started off part-time employee making $7.25 an hour. Happy to have a job and happy to help out. I was injured in a football accident in 1984, and who would have ever known that many, many, many years from that point that I'd be at this point. So when I look at the video, I'm truly humbled because I'm not only a benefactor and a trustee, but now when I look at the next generation, I'm becoming a mentor to the next generation of advocates and community service individuals. So,
to me, the power of us coming together, that our advocacy abilities to create change within our own community, the realization that we deserve more.
And the video, of course, is also starring our own Art Jackson. So we celebrate both of you. Lex, you haven't changed a bit. And Art, you really haven't changed a bit. So thank you all so much. Let's get started. And I thought one thing we would do is we've sent out the discussion topics, and maybe we would just start with thoughts on what our core mission should be. Hey, Christoph Spieler is now connected via video conference. There he is. See a good time for your presentation. Ramesh Gunda headed the transition team on traffic and transportation, and one of their recommendations was that Metro adopt a mission statement. So obviously we want to consider doing that and brainstorm about what in fact should be embodied in it. Does anybody want to start, or should we just go around the table starting with Sanjay, or starting with Lisa, or anybody, or Christoph?
Well, I like one of my favorite things to say is I think I'd like to have a city where you can be a first-class citizen without owning a car. A place where using transit is as pleasant, as dignified, as convenient as it can be.
That's great language. I know it does. Does anybody else have a thought?
I think I would say for Metro, its job number one, our mission should be providing reliable, predictable, convenient, safe, multimodal public transportation options for all residents of the service area. I would probably then say, if you look at it, there are two distinct sets of folks that Metro serves. Folks that absolutely rely and need Metro to do everything they need to do on a daily basis. And then there is another set of customers that it's a choice for them whether they want to use the system or not. And I think as the region grows, if you look at the HGAC numbers by 2040, the key is to find a balance between both sets of users, making absolutely sure nobody in the first group is left behind. But also, if we truly want to have some semblance of mobility when we add 3 more million folks to the region, having the choice, folks where public transportation is a choice, making it a realistic, viable choice becomes critical to have any kind of reasonable mobility in the region. That's a mouthful, but that's...
Completely agree. It seems to me that the phrase connectivity, although that's too long a word, but to connect people to the places they need to go is a critical mission. And, further to what Sanjay said, the truth of the matter is that while some people are reliant on transit now because they can't afford not to use public transit, the fact of the matter is we're not going to have the option for people to use their cars in 2040 to the extent that they do now. So what's currently a choice for some people is not going to be optional to have a thriving economy. Any other thoughts?
I think just to piggyback off of what everybody's already talked about with multimodal, predictable, safe, the other one is, and I think you touched on it, Sanjay, is making Metro a preferred choice. Mm-hmm. And I think when we look at cities that are much smaller than Greater Houston, like San Francisco, and there are several others. You look at the DMV, if we were just there, their multi-transit center, their subways, their trains, their light rail, that's the preferred way to get around. And Houston is totally the opposite today. And I think the real goal is we have to figure out a way to flip that, because as you just said, we're suffering now just trying to get to and from home to our business. 20 years from now, it's going to be impractical. And if we don't provide for infrastructure and consideration today, we're done.
Agree.
I ditto. But I really don't think it's two different things. I don't think it's transit dependent or others. I think Metro's role as a transportation agency is for this region to provide great transit service for everyone. And it's not in conflict. It's a lot of times the focus has been on the transit dependent, but if you're providing really good transit service, everybody can ride it. And if we would stay focused on that, accessibility for all, of course, on using it, but I just think there's a lot more we could do to provide really good transit service as a partner in this region. We're a transportation agency, and our what we bring is the transit aspect.
Yep, I totally agree.
I would add, I think we need to do collaborative community-wide development and work closely with other agencies. I would also say we should aim to have cooperative relationship with the community aimed at a livable community, a livable, walkable, workable community.
One thing I would underline what Lex just said is the transit experience is door to door. And a large part of that experience isn't under the control of Metro, but we have to care about it just as much. The walk along a sidewalk, cross a crosswalk to the front door of the building you're going to, if that is not a great experience, then transit will not be a great experience, and transit will not be a good option for anyone. So I think we have to care about streetscape, we have to care about pedestrian bike connectivity, and we have to care about development, where and in what style, as much as we care about the transit routes themselves.
I'll throw this out there just to kind of continue to beat the same point in travels, and I'm in DC and New York a lot, and I would take either your cab or your Uber or some form of transit. But what I find often over the last at least 3 years is when I need to be from point A to point B, and I ask what's my quickest and most reliable way to get there, I'm referred to light rail, subway. They say that's your most predictable, most reliable, because you can't count on anything else. And I think we have to somehow change our paradigm and our infrastructure so that that is your most predictable and safest way.
One aspect that's important to me, and of course mission and vision and goals, and they overlap a little bit, but I want us to be on the forefront of innovation in the transit arena, and that's why we have the new Office of Innovation to explore everything going on all over the country that's on the vanguard of transit, because it scares me to think we might make an investment in a technology or a corridor or infrastructure that's rendered obsolete by the time we actually get it constructed. And so much is going on out there that, obviously we just have to be keenly aware of seeking the most innovative solutions.
I think that's key, what you just said, right? Would we consider public transportation and transit in 2016? Mm-hmm. It's probably not even going to be, maybe a footnote by the time 2040 rolls around. Everybody's talking, you talk about New York City and San Francisco, DC, Metro Rail. In 2040, it might be autonomous vehicles. It could be a very different reality 20 years from now, making sure that if we have already choices that we need to make on where we invest. Is it an investment? I think the video talked about buses that would be 20 years in Houston and 20 years in rural communities. Are we making investments that will actually serve the public for the next 40 years, or in 10 years, are they going to be obsolete? That's
exactly. And in fact, you may have read that autonomous vehicles are being tested right now. There's some big, it was in the newspaper, there's some place where all the automakers are going to test their autonomous vehicles. So they're definitely going to be here sooner rather than later, and be great in terms of enhancing safety and the ability to have fewer parking spaces, and because they can squeeze in, they know how to park automatically. So that's something exactly. We don't want to invest a lot of money in something that's going to be obsolete by the time we implement it, having seen how long these construction times are. So in terms of our mission, obviously we have set forth the thoughts of first-class transportation without owning a car, pleasant and dignified transit available for all, reliable, predictable, convenient, safe multimodal transportation options for both people that rely and need the system and people that have the choice to use it, a pool of folks with respect to choice, it's going to dwindle as we get further congested. Making Metro a preferred choice, great transit service for everyone, collaborative community-wide development, cooperative relationships, and obviously we'll go through the video and make sure we've captured everything. The transit experience being good door to door, that's the only way it really works. Making sure that we're on top of the innovations out there and are investing in technologies that will last longer than a brief period of time. And, you know, technologies that can accommodate updated innovation. So, yeah, making investments that serve the public long term. An interesting point from the video, too, was, as Lex brought out in the questioning, the fact that actually plans were being made for where the buses that were equipped were going to be used after their shelf life here, which is interesting. It's something for us to consider too, because some of the rural regions around Houston in some of these surrounding counties are affected by the choices we make as well, even if they're not directly on the route. So, hi Cindy. We're on mission. We're on everybody's brainstorming about what they think would be important components of the mission. Some of it, of course, overlaps with the goals and that sort of thing. But do you have any thoughts that you want to contribute at this juncture?
Well, I'll always have thoughts. Well, I'm sure and just looking at the notes that have been taken down, I think I agree with everyone. And it is hard sometimes, I think, to separate the mission, which is, I think, to provide a first-class transportation network, and that includes, you know, the mass transit component of it to the Greater Houston area. What I would add in terms of goals, and I'm probably being redundant to what others have said, I think it's really important that we recognize that a transportation network includes cars, includes bikes, includes walking with your two legs, includes highways, it includes buses, it includes rail, light rail, as well as commuter rail, and carpool. And what other forms of transportation might come up as technology advances. And I guess immediate goal for me is just taking the steps that we've already started with our rail line, what we're going to do with the BRT, as well as our fixed route, what we're trying to do with Metrolift, and really making it a first-class system. And I think that includes, and we've taken steps there too, as it relates to technology. And, you know, sidebar, I've heard a lot from people in the community that they're very excited about the things that we're doing in terms of new technology and technological advances. And of course, I can't not wear my accountant hat. This all has to be done in a manner that we can afford. But again, I would just say the underlying thing, and I've told it to people I know, that we're building a transportation network that's not only addresses the immediate needs of now or in 5 years, but it's building a network that we can build upon for the next 20, 30 years. That we're not only addressing short-term needs, but we're laying the foundation for future needs. So,
all very, very good comments. Christoph, you look like you're about to talk. Are you?
No, actually didn't have anything to add to that.
Okay.
I would add the partnership with the private sector is vital. And I don't know how you want to say that, but I really do think all our planning, all our work going forward is dependent on a good partnership with the private sector. And we need to emphasize that in our work.
and also our public partners, the cities, the county, and the state.
I would say one other thought in terms of all of this is I think a lot of the comments have gone towards the sign of success is more people riding. That really one of our goals has to be as many people using the system as possible. And we get there in a lot of different ways, but ultimately the metric that shows that we're succeeding is more people using the system.
I would say something that's implicit and maybe expressly stated in things others have said, but it is vital that people that truly, in other words, transit is opportunity. You have to get to jobs, you have to get to medical care, to education, and other services. And without that, people have no upward mobility. And so I think ensuring that Houston's economy works for everyone is an important goal of transit.
And let me underline that it's not just getting there, it's being able to get there reliably and reasonably quickly. Because I think especially for low-income residents, time really matters. And us being able to say to you, yes, there's a way to get to your job, but it's going to take you 2 hours and it's a bus that runs only once an hour, is not a good answer. We should be able to get people to where they need to go quickly, conveniently, reliably, frequently.
If I were, and this, hopefully you can capture this somehow in the writing, but I'm painting a picture of what I would consider your everyday suburbia commuter. And I'm using myself, and I'm thinking I would leave home and I live in Spring, and I would drop my kids off at school, and so I need to be able to do that. And then I go into the office, which is downtown Houston. But as an entrepreneur, I may have 3 meetings where I need to get to the medical center, back to downtown, and possibly over to the Galleria. From there, I still would need to get back to get my kids from school and get back home. And I say all that to say we don't have that kind of infrastructure, and I don't even know if we go that far as to spread our geographic touch that far. But when you talk about some of the more progressive cities in terms of light rail and rapid transit, you can do all those things, from going to the airport to going to see a Broadway play. You can do it all via transit, and we're nowhere close to that. So that's why I think you have more drivers.
If you think through that scenario, getting you from home to work isn't enough. And especially if you're taking a park and ride bus or a commuter train to work, you need a good transit system that's at your workplace to get you to all those things you need to go to during the day. And I think that's incredibly important.
Go back to what Karen said. That is, we always talk about public transportation and mobility. I think you hit on Metro has a critical role to play in mobility, and we're not just talking transportation mobility. How you capture that, it's an interesting way to do it, but it's giving predictable access, convenient, frequent access is what leads to mobility solutions both in life and in transportation. So
it is. It's one thing about serving on this board and on the staff is it's impossible to avoid puns involving transit. Our project went off the rails, et cetera. It's just impossible in ordinary conversation with people. But you raise a really great point, and it's not even a pun. Mobility entails so much. Mobility of opportunity is tied to mobility of transit completely. So, right. Other thoughts?
Along with, I think, the technology, and I think, Christoph, you hit on it, it's also ease of access and a system that's easy to understand for people that are looking to use it so that they're not intimidated about using it. And that's not only people that live within the greater Houston area that might use it, but it's people who are coming in for tourism or events or, conventions. I think that the easier it is to use and to access, the more likely we will be to increase the number of riders on our system.
That is a good dimension about the tourism aspect of it, because it really is critical. People expect in this day and time, if they're going to have a Super Bowl here or another event here, a convention, that we have really good transit. So that's another really important dimension. I think we have. Any other thoughts on the core mission? And to the extent different, do you have a thought on the vision? In other words, it's sort of the same thing, but sometimes it's thought of differently. Anybody have any thoughts on a vision for Metro that we haven't captured? It seems like we've...
This is, I mean, it's not really a vision, but it's a component how to get there. And you can build the best product, but if you don't market it right and recognize your target market, you're not going to, I mean, it's just not going to happen. And I think that that's been something that we started putting effort on, but I think we need to continue to put effort on it. And that includes educating the public on how to use the network.
Here's another example. I'm just full of examples on a Monday morning, but I spend quite a bit of time in China, and most recently a lot of time in Shanghai. And I was in the downtown business district of Shanghai, and I was trying to get to what they would call, I guess, their Galleria area or the Bund. And I took a taxi cab there, and the taxi cab had no idea how to get where I was going because of the language barrier. Ultimately, I found someone that spoke English, got on their subway system, got right to the Bund, saved myself probably 70% of the cost, and on my way back, it was just 3 stops on their light rail. So even with language barriers, the Shanghai subway system and light rail system was intuitive. And I think we need to somehow gravitate that way if we want to be a city that might be deemed worthy of an Olympics. We're nowhere close today.
Let me just add to what Troy said. I do think we have a tendency, being in Texas and everything, to be a little parochial sometimes. And there are examples of modern transit in other places in the world that sometimes, I mean, in my prior role, not being on the board, I would look at some of the decisions made by Metro and say, did they even see what's going on in another city where I might have been? And I'll just give you an example. Some of the European cities now are using a kind of light rail that they can pick up and move when the population moves. The rails are not driven into the ground so far. They're going to be there forever, and it's going to cost a lot to pull them up. They just literally pick up the tracks and move the train when they have a need to do that. There may be a lot of things I'm not aware of, rules, laws, whatever, that prevent us from doing that sort of thing. But I think we do need to commit ourselves not to being parochial in all that we do.
Completely agree. I've purchased for everybody on the board, and I also have a lot of copies for the staff, this book, Move, by Rosabeth Moss Cantor, whom I met during my fellowship. And she's in the process of autographing the books for the board. And so, yeah, so you'll be getting them. And you may prefer to read it on your Kindle, which is what I've done, but once you get an autographed book. But it's a really interesting book, and it talks about all of these innovations going on all over the world. Sometimes they're not cheap. I mean, one of the great things about China is the government decides where to spend the money, and they spend what it takes, and you don't have to go through the appropriations process. So they have apparently a really great transit system. But that kind of thinking is where we really need to go in the future. We just can't get ourselves locked into the same old ways of thinking about technology.
They're talking about intuitive, right? The system has to be convenient, usable for all of us that live here, work here, play here, but it also has to make ease of sense and ease of usage for those that have never been here. And how do you balance those two? Because most folks, third largest city, global city, most diverse city, and if you come here and if the system doesn't lend itself to ease of usage, you lost the battle right even before it's done.
So I think the question that you're asking, not just wise person said, when you talk vision, is how do you want to look? If you're just dialing 15, 10, 20 years fast forward, what do you want to look like? And I love to hear that question, because I think what stops us from thinking about true vision is we know all the limitations. We know the accounting. We know the regulatory bureaucracy. We know all these things. So it's really, when you talk vision, you're saying, okay, where do you want to be? And then you talk, how do you get there, versus not focus so much on all the things that wouldn't let us get there today.
I think the mission is
Well, one thought on the vision end. When I travel up and down Main Street, when I go from home to work to Metro to Rice, and I'm riding the train, the feeling I get is one of freedom. The feeling I get is there are all these places I can get to. I can go whenever I want to go. I will never have to wait for a long time. I will have a comfortable ride. I know it will get me there in time. And I feel like I have this zone of things I want to do and places I need to get to that I can access freely and without obstacle. And frankly, in many cases, I can do that better on transit than I can on a car. I think that's a good transit system. A good transit system is a system that gives you the feeling of freedom, not the feeling of limitations.
I think to piggyback off that, I think to piggyback off what you're just saying is great when you talk about vision, because in an ideal world, for me, Metro would be my personalized chauffeur, where I'm able to get on, do a parking ride, I'm able to check email, not worry about the speed limit or traffic, and be able to still do all of my dealings and know that I'm getting from point A to point B because Metro can get me there. That's my preference, and I think that's where you were going, Christoph, and yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, just to piggyback off of that, I think back to year and a half ago, well, actually 2 years ago, taking my daughter back east and going and visiting colleges. And we had a car, but, I'd like to see in Houston, like I felt like in Boston or New York or Philadelphia, that even though I had a car, I drove to the hotel, I parked the car, and then we used mass transit while we were within the city, and only used the car as a means to go on to the next city to visit colleges. And where it is the same thing, it was my first choice versus the automobile being the first choice. And part of that is the reality of who wants to drive in New York City. I mean, just getting to the hotel was difficult enough. But, I think Houston, with our traffic and the size of our population and where it's projected to grow, that's what we're going to face. And, when people have talked to me about rail or not rail or buses or whatever, or getting away from the car, my response is, look at LA, and LA's sort of like our big sister in terms of we've got an urban sprawl, we're spread out. And I have driven out in LA where it took me literally an hour to go 2 miles. I could have walked it faster than driving it. And that's where we're going. And I think it's going to be, we've got to be in the position that we've got that transportation network as the population grows and as there's this sort of gridlock, that there are these alternatives, and that we become the first choice rather than, oh, my car's in the shop, so now I've got to use the bus, or we've got to do that. And we're not there yet, but I do think we're there for our younger population. I think they get it. Some of us old ones don't. But.
And they also know how to use the ridership technology. Yeah. It's a snap for them.
Oh, no, it's more of what everybody else has already said. It's the, I drove my car today because I didn't have an alternative.
Right. So it is just so important. Options and the feeling of freedom of being able, just think about when you go to the med center and you can hop on the train and you don't have to deal with the parking. It's such a glorious luxury.
This might talking about pun intended, right?
Mm-hmm.
You talked about Los Angeles and urban sprawl. We are a city with no limits. The tagline that the partnership uses. Sometimes you wonder if it's no limits on opportunity or no limits on urban sprawl. We don't know which one it is. This might be going granular as you look at mission. So I don't know if these numbers are remotely exact, but they trend that way. Christoph talks about how easy it is to go places along the Main Street line, along the red line. But if you look at the way the region's growing, less than 500,000 folks live inside Loop 610. About 1.5 million live within Beltway 8. It's the next concentric circle, which is really 610 to Beltway 8. And most of the new folks that we're adding is probably outside of Beltway 8. So in terms of bridging the gap from where we are today to where the population growth is going to be by 2040, that's a huge leap. And most of the backbone that we have of the system is all inside that 610 loop. And the vision, if you want to think about what do we want to look like when we grow up in 2040, most of that's well outside where we have the backbone today. So that needs to be factored into any long-term vision that we put in place.
But in addition to that, and I don't disagree with you, but in addition to that, that means bringing in new partners into the system. Right now we have small cities that don't pay into Metro. And, representing the small cities that do pay in, if you mention another city coming and using our services without paying their fair share, there's nothing that sends the mayors off the deep edge more than that. So we have to, I think, get the state and figure out a way to entice new partners to participate in the network, because it's going to do exactly what you said, Sanjay. It's growing outside of just our service area, and if we're really going to truly be a transportational network, we have to have other partners, and they've got to pay their fair share. I mean, there's no other two ways about it. But I think for them to want to pay their fair share, they have to see that there's a benefit.
Good point. One note about public-private partnerships, which I think are a great idea when they work. I think there are going to be folks in the community that are going to look at ways to expand privatization of transit. And I want us to certainly look at any reasonable option, but considering the success ratio or lack thereof of privatization efforts. I think we're going to probably face some thought that much more of Metro should be privatized, or at least I know some people are looking at that. And so I certainly think we ought to be open to privatization of any part of the service that makes sense. We already use private companies to perform some Metrolift services, and we have Uber and Lyft now out there that are options different than even the cab companies to do it. But, you know, I also think we ought to bear in mind that we cannot give short shrift to the public purpose of Metro and the opportunity it provides as we're moving forward while looking at all reasonable alternatives.
I think we get to where we want to be. Public-private partnerships are going to be an essential part of the game. It's how we collaborate, how we cooperate with private sector. It's maybe philosophical, but public transportation by definition exists for the greater common good, not necessarily to make money.
Right.
And a pure private sector enterprise is, I mean, by definition exists to make money. So I've had conversations with folks that talk about why is it not easy to have a rail network like we have in New York or DC, which probably have the highest riderships in the country, and neither of those systems make money. But they exist for the common good. And there is a role for public-private partnerships, but it's not as simple as just privatizing it.
Well, I agree. No transit systems make money. I mean, I doubt that any transit system in the country makes money. It's all subsidized, just as highways are, substantially. So transportation is subsidized and has been ever since President Eisenhower built the highway network. So that has to be looked at. I'm all for public-private partnerships where they can work. Absolutely. It's an important part of our mission to look at all of that. So,
let me just add, when I think of public-private partnership, I think about it maybe a little differently than others. It seems to me that the private sector ought to be contributing more to the system that we have. They ought to be more invested in building a quality system because it enables them to get quality employees. It enables them to get people to work on time. It enables a lot of things constructively to happen. So when I think public-private, I don't mean letting some profiteer try to make some money off of a service that we can provide in a more secure and reliable way. What I'm thinking about is the relationship with the private sector where they value what we're doing to the extent that they will contribute more than they historically have.
Couldn't agree with that more. And I don't think all transportation is subsidized. So at the toll road, no federal funds, no subsidies. So
well, but you operate
pay.
on a highway. You operate on a highway.
We build the highway.
Well, okay. Let me ask you then, so you believe that toll roads are fully profitable on their own? Because I'm just thinking
I don't think
about
all toll roads are alike. You know, there's lots of different things going on with the toll roads. I'm familiar with Harris County's model.
Yes, of course.
So with Harris County's model, you know, it's backed by ad valorem taxes, which have never been needed to be tapped into, but it is an enterprise fund, and it is capital and O&M comes off the dollars from the tolls. So if surplus left over, it stays in this region. It goes back into the network to build more infrastructure. So it is not, you know, there's no gas tax dollar, there's no competing funds. So it is a sustainable financial model. And just like Lex said, you know, if people find a value in it, they'll pay for it. And, you know, maybe I agree, like if you know, I don't think TxDOT is broke because they don't know how to manage money, but the sustainability of their financial model, you know, and it costs money to take federal money. So, you know, like I don't know, I think we should strive for as much financial independence as possible. And if that means, you know, the services cost a little bit more, on the whole idea of privatizing, I mean, you have when it makes sense is like, for instance, you hire a contractor because it doesn't make sense for Metro to spend the capital to be able to build a rail. So you privatize, and the contractor is going to make a profit off it. And, you know, that's kind of the break-even point would be if it cost somebody, if they're doing it, if it's a private, they're doing it to make profit, just like Sanjay said. So if Metro can't do it because of the whatever the service is, there's not enough of it to actually maximize, then you do privatize those things. But certainly the bus services and the things that there's more of, it shouldn't be that way. And I wonder too, like what I feel like I come across looking at the highways and our toll road and Metro is there's the capital investment, which is always extremely high and sometimes prevents projects from happening because they can't be funded. But there's the O&M that goes with it forever. So once a project is birthed, forever it costs money, and the older it gets, the more it costs. So with the highway system, you know, they got the initial investment to put it in, but then is it sustainable? Like we just put in a rail system. It's going to cost a lot of money to keep it running forever. And the older it gets, the more it's going to cost. So I think the O&M cost and how that's modeled financially is extremely critical in deciding the tool you're going to use to solve each problem.
I agree.
And let me totally agree with that. And I think it also goes to, Lisa, I think all of your comments have a very strong relationship to politics, where the difference between Metro and a private provider is Metro is not in a position where we choose which services to operate based on which services will make the most money. And I know the toll road's been in the same situation. I know the Toll Road Authority has in the past at various times been under political pressure to do projects which didn't pencil out because the goal why the elected officials wanted that project had nothing to do with the revenues versus the cost. It had to do with serving constituents in a given area. And we get those requests all the time. I mean, the interesting thing I think is you look at the elected official requests we get, the stuff the elected officials request tends to be the stuff that requires the highest subsidy. And so we have competing missions here. We have a public service mission, and we have a mission that can be expressed in spending the public dollars well. And we have to realize both of those because ultimately they're both part of the mission we have. And I think on the big capital projects, that becomes even more intense because there are some capital projects which will actually cut your operating costs, which will, for example, I think the Main Street line is cheaper to operate than the buses it replaced because it carries so many people. It's actually considerably more cost effective on an operating basis than running a much larger number of buses compared to a smaller number of trains. Those kind of projects can really make your long-term finances look good. If you build a low ridership project that's very capital intensive, it's probably also going to be very operating cost intensive, and you're stuck with it for a long period of time. And the way transit works is capital dollars are usually easier to get than operating dollars. And capital dollars you have to pay for every year. Operating dollars you have to pay for every year, whether the economy is good or not. You can't delay a project. Once you have the project, you've got to operate it. So I think we have to be very careful about what we undertake. And we also have to be aware that we have those two missions, that if we were simply trying to operate the most cost-effective system possible, it would be a very different system.
I agree with all that. I think we need to recognize, though, that one financial model is not going to fit every type of service we have. And the other thing I think we have to avoid is like something like the Main Street line. You know, our annual costs are low in terms of maintenance, but the problem with some of these that are more capital intensive, isn't it DC, Christoph, which is that there's an eastern city that's had threats of shutting down the rail. Yeah, so we have to not sacrifice because of the short term, the long term, and recognize that we need to put, if we need to put in dollars to make sure that the Main Street line is viable, the capital, you know, the iron and rail and all that versus the rail cars, that we're putting in the money to do that. Because what I've seen, and I saw this in Bel Air, for 40 years they built streets, and then streets will last 40 years, and they'll occasionally would put, you know, like some asphalt down and fill out a hole. But then all of a sudden you have a 50-year-old, 40-year-old infrastructure that no money had been put to. And that's what I think we need to also be aware of. You know, so I think there's a short term, which is making sure that we're not doing any initiative that we can't sustain as an agency. And I think where we can charge a price for it, and businesses that want it, communities, outlying cities that want it, there should be an investment in that. And then for those services that, you know, you can't, I mean, we wouldn't have riders if we were charging what the cost of running the fixed route service was. We have to recognize, again, we're a governmental agency. Part of what we do is going to be subsidized. But I would say what we offer, there maybe isn't any tangible, I mean, other than our fares, there isn't, you know, it isn't adding to our bottom line, but what it is adding to for the region and for Houston in terms of economic growth and economic sustainability in Houston, you know, without our transportation network, you wouldn't have new businesses moving in. You wouldn't have the increase in the property values and associated with that property tax dollars, sales tax dollars. We wouldn't see it without this transportation network. I mean, it's critical. So there, we add to, it's maybe not dollars in Metro's pocket, but we are adding dollars to businesses and our local governments.
Definitely. Very, very good point. Everybody's points have been great. Believe it or not, it's about 11:25, so we've really covered a lot of ground on the first two issues. Does anybody need a break, or should we keep pushing? Yeah, okay, we'll keep going. So why don't we move, unless there's something that we've overlooked on mission and vision, and of course we're going to have to take all this and synthesize it and come back to the board. But, and if anyone, by the way, is creative about drafting a mission statement, please volunteer yourself after this is over, because we are going to have to synthesize this. Why don't we move to 3? What goals do you believe our board should set and achieve? And probably, I think we've covered a lot of general goals, but are there specific goals that we want to, in our 2 years and hopefully 4 years and beyond, for some of you, what do we want to achieve?
Well, let me start by one that I've been thinking about a lot recently, which is I think we need to figure out how to effectively partner with all of the cities in the service area and with the county, as well as with developers, so that we radically upgrade our bus stop and sidewalk infrastructures. And a big part of that is process. I mean, to me, every time a street gets rebuilt and there are new sidewalks, new curbs being put in, we ought to put the stops at a good spacing and then put in a full pad at every stop so that we can install a shelter at every stop. That ought to just be standard operating practice. So that I think there's a lot of opportunity to dramatically increase the quality of the passenger experience if we set up the right processes with the cities, the county, and the private developers. And that's achievable in the short term. The results will take years to pay off, but the processes can be achieved in the short term, and you'll start seeing results quickly.
totally agree with that. You got this expensive service, and cheapest part has got to be sidewalks and bus stops. I mean, and it makes such a difference in people being able to use it.
I'll just add a footnote to that, if I can interject. We need to bring our stops up to compliance with the ADA.
Definitely.
So,
and we're still building we still have instances of, for example, the city of Houston building brand new stops that are not ADA compliant, which is actually illegal. So getting the standards on these things right is incredibly important.
So I had written down, I mean, we all know that the finances are tight the next few years. So there's not a lot of latitude for a lot of new type initiatives. And I'd rather see us spend our dollars along those same lines for enhancements to what we've already started. Finish the projects we've committed to and enhance what we've already got through technology, through bus stops, through shelters, through ADA compatible sidewalks, and also getting creative in terms of figuring out ways to leverage the dollars that we have through partnerships. For example, if one of the small cities, if West U is putting in a street and we've got a bus that goes down there, the time to make those changes for sidewalk is cheapest when you're redoing the street. And, you know, it's stuff like if a city wants a bench, well, you know, we split the cost. I mean, I think that we've got to get more creative in terms of our money, because our money is going to be tight for the next few years. And so I think with the projects that we've started, the new bus network, the rail lines that are being completed, the Uptown project, I think we finish what we have and we make it the best we can. I go after our low-hanging fruit, the things that we don't have to invest a lot of dollars but have maximum return. Because if there is a shelter and it's raining or it's hotter, then you know what, at least you can sit there. Or if you're disabled and we're trying to use our fixed routes service, that you can easily access it. And again, you know, I think along the same lines of media initiatives, then planning, enhancing what we have in a fiscally responsible way, but laying the groundwork for what are going to be our next steps once we've moved beyond this economic downturn, where we will have funds that we're not playing catch up. We'll be in a position that we can immediately start on what the next steps are, whether it's an expanded network or whatever that entails, or commuter rail. We're in a position to hit the ground running versus having to go through the political as well as the community process.
Cindy, I think that's an excellent point. I think what you just said, and then what Lex said a little earlier about the public-private partnerships, I think we've all kind of touched on it. If I'm not mistaken, I think the Purple Line with Southwest Airlines, they were willing to jump in and look to help fund. Why? Because it brings more riders to Hobby Airport. And I think that goes along with what you were just saying. And what you were just saying, I think we need to, as a board, understand how good public-private partnerships have worked, what lessons learned are out there, and then I think we need to try to leverage that to make sure that we expand our infrastructure so that maybe we don't have all the funds to do everything we want, but if we could start to put the infrastructure in place, I think we have really pushed the ball forward, and I think that's achievable during our stint here on the board.
I'd like to see us craft a plan that the community embraces, and one that will enable us to get a new bonding authority.
Yes, I'm totally on board with that. That's actually a priority of mine.
And I would say, to me, the top priority in terms of capital investments is speed and reliability in the core of our network. If you look at the new bus network and you look at the complaints that we get, second only to bus stops and sidewalks is speed and reliability. And the most congested parts of town are where our buses are getting stuck. And in some cases, those are even freeway corridors, like I-10 inside the loop, where we don't have HOV lanes. So the park and ride buses are stuck in freeway traffic. Sometimes we're talking about corridors like Richmond, where as the Galleria area gets more congested, our buses are getting stuck in that, and that's really impacting, say, people on the east side who are trying to get to jobs on the west side. It's really impacting our core riders. So I think really focusing on capital investments, which are about making the system that we have faster and more reliable, I think is really important.
I do think, though, further to Lex's point, we need a regional transit plan, which is going to be a very enormous undertaking, really, to bring all the stakeholders together and get one together, given some competing interests. I mean, in some ways it seems obvious because there's a template from the 2003 referendum which was well-founded, and we don't need to go along Richmond, although the congressman has said that if the voters approved a route along Richmond, that he would support it. And he's certainly been supportive to us, by the way, on other things that we've wanted. So we very much appreciate that. But the point being, I think we have to have a regional transit plan, and I think that we have to connect the downtown business center to the Galleria Post-Oak Business Center one way or another. It could be bus rapid transit, which seems to be the hot thing now nationwide. Everybody's looking at that. It could be light rail along a corridor. It could be maybe other things too, maybe even just regular old dedicated bus lanes. I don't know. I tend to think the real way to connect that is either BRT or some form of rail. But at any rate, it seems to me we need to connect that because the University line was really the linchpin of the rail system in the 2003 referendum. And I think the ridership on the green and purple lines would be higher if we had better connectivity between them and the Galleria Post-Oak area. So, I think one of the most go ahead.
Of the most obvious projects out there, which was in the 2003 referendum as a longer-term project, was the Inner Katy project, which is basically saying downtown to Northwest Transit Center.
The which project? I'm sorry, I didn't.
The Inner Katy.
Oh, right. Mm-hmm.
And it's a corridor that carries a huge amount of traffic within the city. There's a huge amount of local bus riders in that corridor, but it's also a key corridor for connecting all of the suburbs out the Katy Freeway, all of the suburbs out 290 into downtown, and it meets both the light rail lines downtown and the north end of the Uptown corridor.
Exactly.
I think that corridor is hugely important, and if we don't get something in there within a few years, it will become one of the biggest bottlenecks in the regional transportation system.
But, the one thing, we talk about the 03 referendum, but it passed by a very narrow margin. And, I'm a big believer in if we do what we've got on our plates now, and we need to do it well, and build our market share, so to speak, and then lay the groundwork for a regional transportation plan that covers a lot of different constituencies, then we'll have a referendum that would pass, hopefully, somewhat overwhelmingly instead of just barely squeaking through. I think part of the problem of the 03 referendum and has caused this agency so many headaches is because it barely squeaked by. And I think if we've got to be smart about what we're proposing to the community. And I think if we're taking what we already have and doing it really well and investing dollars in our communities with better bus shelters, ease of access, better technology, better connectivity with what we've got, then they become our standard bearer to go out into the community to help us sell a future referendum. And that's what it is. I mean, I hate to say it, that's what politics is. And it's bad when, so many of the headaches have been because that 03 referendum, for whatever reason, just barely squeaked by. And I think we need a better plan, and a plan that embraces a broad variety of constituents instead of the agency saying, oh, we know best about mass transit. You can't ignore the fact that there are going to be people that this is Houston, they're always going to want to drive their cars. But if we're offering this great transportation network that we already have, then I think more and more people will want to use it if it's easy to use. If we offer the best Metro lift around, then people will be supportive. If they feel like they're getting something or can get something, they're more likely to support it. But I think it would be detrimental, and we'd just be setting the agency up for heartburn down the road if we don't build a plan where we get buy-in from a broad variety of constituents. And the first place to start, I think, are the people that are already using the system.
I think we can maybe do both. I think Cindy's absolutely right that one of the key ways to sell the system is to convince people that they're getting value now. And that's a real challenge because people don't use the system, and the idea of the exploding population is theoretical right now. When you look at the slides, early slides of here's what we've done at Metro, because I went back through and looked at a lot of things, and the highways were always congested. The photos, they were always, from day one, you noticed cars packed on them, even when a new highway corridor opened or was expanded. And so, but it's theoretical to people. They don't fully realize where we're headed without really good transit until we're there, until we're like Austin and you're sitting on Mopac furious. And I remember when Mopac was built in Austin, they didn't want it. The neighborhoods didn't want it because they didn't want Austin to grow, and they didn't think we needed it. And here now you can't even, it's horribly congested in peak times. So I don't think people get where we're going to be. I agree with Cindy that the best way to sell a future referendum is to improve our services here and know that people have value, or that's one of the key ways to do it. But we also, I may have made a mistake in saying that we're wedded to, I didn't mean to say this if I did, that we're wedded to the exact ways the referendum laid things out. I don't think we necessarily need to go down Richmond. I do think the idea of going down West Park originally was a good one. I think we should look at all manners to get the connectivity, but we do have to get the connectivity or the system won't work. So I don't know if we have a slight disagreement there or not, but it seems to me we can have both. But we're not optimizing our transit, and one of the because we haven't completed connectivity as envisioned by the 2003 referendum. I don't think most people deny that connectivity was a good idea. Where I think the 2003 referendum foundered was on the idea of the expense of rail. People were a very, very, very active constituency, didn't want money invested in light rail, and that's why it barely passed, and they may have been right. Now we have BRT, which is the hot new thing, and they may have been wrong. Light rail is the right place to go. Just think if now we had a light rail line, like the one that connects to the medical center that went to the Galleria. Tell me you wouldn't use that a lot. So I don't know who was right and who was wrong, but I do know that it's interesting to go back and look at both sides' materials for the 2003 referendum because a lot of it centered on the expense of the rail system. And if we found another way to get that connectivity, who knows?
You know, if you look at the last, it wasn't a bond referendum, but the referendum we had on GMP, we had the highest number of passing it. Now, there will be people, friends of mine, who said it was because the language was confusing, and I think it was. But you can't explain confusing, because a comment was made, people didn't know what they were voting on. But you can't explain the number of people who supported it on that alone. I think the fact is, not everyone, but a huge portion, and this is why they voted for it, felt like they were getting something. You had the outlying communities or the small cities in the county feeling like they were still getting money for roadways. And then you felt like the people that are big on mass transit and rail felt like Metro was getting money. So there was sort of something for everyone. And I'm not disagreeing because I would like to see the downtown rail connected with the uptown BRT, but it may not be rail, it may be BRT. It's not necessarily down Richmond. But again, I think if we're doing our job and we're doing it well, and people are using it, and we're getting to the point which we've done with some of our parking rights, if there's too many people using it, the demand is so high, they will in fact be coming to us saying, we want more, we want that connectivity. I'd like to see us expand the rail to the airports. I mean, think about our business communities being able to go to work and leave your car in your parking garage or whatever, take the bus down, and then go off to the airports. I mean, to me, that's a big factor in how to get around the community. I just think we've got to be smart and use what we have in our toolkit, which is building upon what we already have in place, because we're seeing the success of our rail. I think when the BRT's done in Uptown, and as you add, and it's not that far into the future, but 1 million people in the next 10 years, there's going to be a tipping point. And I think if we have a great network of what we already have in place, and then the tipping point reaches that, how long are you willing to sit driving from Bel Air to downtown or Bel Air to the Galleria? Well, most people are willing to do 20 minutes, 30 minutes, but an hour and a half or 2 hours? No. You're going to look for an alternative, and I think they will be beating down our door. And we need to be positioned with that plan and getting buy-in for that plan that they will help. It'll make it an easy sell, or relatively easy.
Lisa?
No, I love everything you're saying. The connectivity to me is missing. I think our parking rides, I don't know about all of them, but 290, you say look at what we already have in place and do it well. And I just, like you say, the time is now for the sidewalks. I think the time is now for the parking rides and the HOV facility, not necessarily for the carpoolers, but because the park and ride buses, to me, that's my train. So it's I don't know cost-wise. I can't ever figure out in the O&M budget, what the cost is. But if our park and rides could be even better than they are right now, one of the flaws is they only go downtown. So if you had more connectivity, another hub, and I wish we could do more with our park and rides. I wish we could partner with TxDOT. They build the infrastructure, we operate the service, and save the space for it now, while before you see more pictures of congested traffic.
Right. You talked about the highways have always been congested. Now they're wider and more congested, and at some point in time they can only be so wide. I had a point on the regional transportation plan, but I will say one thing, given that Lisa brought up park and ride and HOV. Christoph talked about inner Katy connectivity, right? We've proven that is a corridor that's got continued increase in traffic, interestingly, both ways. There's a tremendous amount of traffic that goes out to the energy corridor. So along those specific corridors where there is two-way traffic at multiple times of the day, those are strategic areas because what's in it for, there's something in it for a lot more folks than just those coming into downtown. Regional transportation plan with stakeholder buy-in, given the sheer magnitude of these projects, the cost and consequently the time that it takes, having something in the transportation plan that has incremental improvements. Because not all of these major capital projects are going to happen. You're not going to get two rail lines to the airport to, along Inner Katy and connectivity to Galleria and commuter rail all in a decade. So having something where there is incremental improvements. It may not be the eventual thing that we want to have by 2040, but there is some improvement in the next few years, in the next decade. So I think in January, Christoph, correct me if I'm wrong, there was an emerging corridors map that we kind of looked at the board to say, these are corridors where if we had all the money and all the support and all the time in the world, we would have BRT/rail/something on them. Having maybe dedicated bus lanes that gets reliable, predictable, more frequent, safe connectivity gets folks to support a longer-term investment, higher investment in a regional plan.
Yes.
I'm an engineer, so I'll say concrete is made of aggregate, small stones that eventually come together. So having that incremental improvement, I think, gets us that buy-in, gets us that higher support at a referendum that then translates into a mandate.
I agree. And one thing that arose in my mind from what you said, Sanjay, is not everything we do is going to require bonding authority. We are in a difficult situation financially, but there are projects, incremental projects we can do that might not require bonding authority. So, and we might as well get those accomplished too. Where I suspect we're going on connecting the downtown to the Galleria. For one thing, we could go up on I-10 and connect that way. But my guess, subject to what our Office of Innovation and our other staff comes up with, is in terms of where people are going, we're probably going to be looking at BRT, and ultimately it's probably going to be autonomous. So, it'll be interesting once BRT, and apparently the Post Oak BRT is supposed to be one of the, we're told by by Uptown that it's being looked at across the nation to see how well it works, and we'll learn more about the hidden costs possibly of BRT. Until you do something, you don't fully know what you're buying off on and how it compares to light rail, but it almost certainly has to be significantly cheaper, and it accommodates to autonomous vehicles so well. Of course, so does a rail line, but at any rate, that would be my guess as to what we're looking at.
Well, and I think that one of the nice things is thinking about BRT as a package of technologies. You don't have to implement it all at once. So that if you have an existing bus route, you can start by adding a mile of dedicated lanes in a particularly congested segment, and that bus will get better. You can then get better vehicles, and that service will get better. You can improve the stops, and it will get better. You can, instead of doing one, $2 billion project, you can do a series of projects that you can afford where every step gets better. And there's even things like traffic priority for buses that are running late, for example, which can really increase their reliability at very low cost. And I think some of those kind of things, thinking of these projects as incremental projects, my worry here in saying let's hold off on big projects is there are some of our services which are going to get worse every year. The Westheimer bus is going to get slower every year. The 290 park and ride buses are going to get slower every year unless we do something to counteract that. So we need to worry also about maintaining the quality of the services we have, and maybe that's relatively modest projects. Maybe that's finding a way to stripe an HOV lane on I-10 and putting a BRT service in it as a first step. Maybe it's looking at some of those, looking at the Westheimer corridor and figuring out how to get those buses to move more reliably. but being smart about those steps so that they can add up to something big. And I'd say the other thing is we need to be worried on these projects on preserving right-of-way. That there is a value in designing a project you can't afford to build right away, and then making sure you start acquiring the key real estate before a building gets built on it and that project becomes impossible.
This is the incremental, collaborative, cooperative, because you got to work with multiple other agencies to make many of these happen, and really, relatively speaking, small capital investment. And once folks see that those small projects increase reliability and frequency and convenience, then they're a lot more willing to consider a $1 billion project. I'm not saying along those, all I'm saying is if they get used to the convenience of public transportation, they're more likely to support a referendum rather than trust us, we'll spend $3 billion and things will be much better for you.
Well, they have to feel like they're getting something.
Yeah.
And even it's convincing the person that's, driving their car that they can get something from it. It's building your constituency, and you build it in part through your market share or future market share. And I think, it's always easy to look back, and hindsight's 20/20, but what I heard coming on when I got on the board were there were people that in 03 that felt like, well, I supported it, but the agency didn't use the money for the bus network. And that was part of it too. Everything went to rail. So as much as we can, I think we've got to be able to give, we have to build a plan that sells itself or makes it easy to sell. And the first place you start is with what you already have.
Yeah, I address that actually at the outset. One of the frustrating things, I do hear that mantra all the time. It is fictitious. We reimagined the bus network. We did exactly what we envisioned in the 2003 referendum with respect to the bus network. In fact, can we put that slide back up? Because I think it's worth really underscoring this. Maybe nobody's back there to do it. Yeah. But we really did accomplish a great deal of what the 2003 referendum envisioned. Really, the only thing we didn't get done was the university line. And that was, we were never going to have enough money, frankly, in hindsight, to do that. The phase 2 was going to be, I really needed about $1.4 billion or something like that. And because of the negotiations with certain elements of the business community, who then turned around and generally, not all of them, but certain of them went ahead and opposed the referendum anyway, vigorously with a lot of money. We have lived up to what we said.
I know, but it's 12, 13 years later.
No, it's not. It's not. Take a look. Well, yeah, maybe it is 12, 13 years later.
The new bus network, I mean,
that's
only been the last couple of years.
But the new bus network wiped out. Where is the slide?
Right there.
The new bus network, the only reason that says that is because it's not comparable to the 44 new bus routes. That's not to say we didn't add new bus routes. It's just everything was redesigned. And so now, it's serving the same function. It's not apples to apples. But when you look at everything else, the transit centers, the park and ride lots, all of that kind of thing, not all of which was supposed to be done by now anyway, because some of it was in phase 3. We've done a great deal. So I think you can safely say that when people tell you that, that's just not true. Well, that's certainly a mantra that's been used against Metro, but it's just not right. And it's taken hold, which is one reason I did this slide. It's taken hold. I hear that too. Oh, well, you didn't do. Actually, so I said, let's figure it out, did we? Yeah. And it turned out we have. So, it's just really important not to accept these mantras. Not that I wasn't doing it too until I really got to the bottom of it, but. We have, and so that's not an argument that will be in their arsenal next time. And hopefully, further to your point, we'll have buy-in on something that will pass like the 2012 referendum did.
Yeah, I just think it's important to, if we're doing our job well with what we have, and then it's like when I first started working, someone told me, they said, it's not just good enough that you do a good job, which was hard for me to, I believed you work hard and you just got the recognition, but they said part of it too is letting your boss know that you're doing a good job.
Yes.
Well, maybe part of this is we're not letting our bosses know all the stuff that we've done. And that's where I think a strong marketing plan and education plan and working with our partners and keeping them well informed. Because Karen, I still hear from people like, oh, I'm glad that you have a CPA there. I'm glad you're there because they're just wasting all this money and they're doing all this stuff. And I think it's because we're not doing a good enough job telling people.
Well, I agree with that, but I also think we have to put it in perspective because it's always easier to be the critic than the person in the arena, as Teddy Roosevelt said. And there's a whole group of folks out there in the community who have sort of made it their mission to be detractors of Metro. And I think it's incumbent on all of us as board members to spread the word in the community when we speak and also just counter it. I mean, when people say that, I think it's important to say, actually, that's just ridiculous. We've accomplished a great deal. We have all these awards. Thank you, Cindy and prior board members, for financial transparency. We have a good bond rating, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's really important for us to get our facts together. And by the way, I'm going to be spending some real time doing that on a presentation that maybe all of us can use when we speak, and then we'll go out and speak as much as we can. Cindy and Don made a great presentation at the Bel Air City Council, but I think it's up to us to spread the word. And yes, you can market things, but it's a little difficult to go out and market. We've done what we said we would do. I mean, it's people either buy off on that or they don't. I'm not disagreeing with you at all. As we speak and we're brainstorming, I'm thinking of how do you send that particular message, because I think that's very, very important because there's just so much misinformation out there. But this waste of money business is ridiculous.
No,
and you'll hear that, by the way. You'll hear that from our detractors, and that's just not right.
And I agree. And I think, again, though, I just go back to if we've got a satisfied customer base. You think about Apple. I mean, Apple's done as well as they've done because they're innovative and they have a great product. But the people that use the iPhone and the iPad and the Mac, they love them. I mean, my daughters have only been Mac users, and they probably themselves have sold more Macs just because they tell everyone about it. And that's where I'd like to see us move towards. And I think, again, doing what we do and doing it the best we can do, from having polite, helpful bus operators to people in the customer service area. I mean, it all will help with the future plan. I just think, and the more we get out and the more we pass, I think it sells it. It will, if you have a satisfied customer, they'll be part of your flag.
But the problem is, and I couldn't agree more with what you've said, but the problem is a lot of people don't ride the system, and so they don't fully know what they're talking about. And so when they say things like that, that they're people that have never gotten on a bus, and they don't. So I think part of what you're saying that's really important is we need to market the system enough so that people for whom transit is not their only option ride the system. And that's a real challenge, because that way then, further to everything else you're saying, our good service, because the truth is we do generally, I think we all agree, have an excellent staff. The bus operators do a great job generally. So how do we get people exposed to that? And that's
Well,
further to what
and
you're
I,
saying
you know,
about
and I
the
think
marketing.
what you mentioned in terms of technology, I had a guy I used to be on city council with, came and a friend of his was like, the best thing, and he pulls up his iPhone, the best thing, not the new bus network, but the best thing is the technology. And he said, now I can be in my desk and I can look and I can know when my bus is going to be coming. So he says, now I use it. So we've got some guy there, I don't even know who he is, he's promoting Metro because of the technology. And that's the thing, I think doing what we do and doing it the very best in every layer and enhancing what we have with that bus stops and sidewalks and all that, that will go a long way for people to say, we want more.
Yes,
You
I
know,
agree.
and they trust us with their dollars. They know they're getting good value for their dollars. So.
Well, but the other thing too, though, is we can't wait for that because Houston's exploding. So we have to do some things in the meantime to develop a plan and get started on it, I think.
No, I think so too. Yeah. I think we've got to be ready for, we've got to be ahead of the game. We've got to be planning out there.
But Lex is dying to talk.
Well, at the risk of interrupting this passionate dialogue, you know, we are faced with a kind of a dilemma because, frankly, what Cindy said is, I agree with that in 2003, the rhetoric extended well beyond the number of accessible bus stops or the number of bikeways or the number of new bus systems and the number of trains. The rhetoric was expansive to the point that everybody who was told, who was expected to go to the polls were told, your life is going to be better and transit's going to make it so. And then we talked about rail and buses and it was a beautiful picture. If you pull up some of those old ads, you can find that. It was totally overpromised and oversold, regardless of what the quantifiable measures are. So we have to kind of get out from under that, and I think we have to flip the script and stop being defensive about what did or didn't happen, but start talking about what's happening tomorrow. Tomorrow we're outfitting 6 new buses with new upholstery. Tomorrow we're inaugurating 6 new bus stops in neighborhoods where you can use them. I mean, we shouldn't wait until the new line opens. I'm really nervous about what happens with the press conference when the Harrisburg line finally opens. I wouldn't, I think we need to give some thought to how that's presented because that could be a real tipping point in itself. So I really think we need to take advantage of the steps we take and not wait for a giant leap to say what we've actually accomplished here. And I also think that we need to, when we craft our plan, make it one that people can relate to, that doesn't overpromise, that's rational, that we can show how things are going to get done, and that people can hold us accountable for. And the accountability issue is the one that public agencies must respond to, and they must be prepared to defend themselves on that basis. So to be accountable to people for things you promise is very, very important, and therefore we need to clean up our rhetoric. I like your idea of producing talking points that we can all relate to, that we can all use and buy into. And I think we have to be very careful when we're communicating with the public, because we're apt to go and hear some wonderful ideas. And I already have in the short time I've been a member here. I think we're also at risk of saying, that's a great idea, we'll see what we can do. Well, maybe we can't see what we can do because of the current circumstances. Maybe we need to put that on a list and take a name so that we can engage that person in a realistic discussion about how to eventually reach that objective. But just to simply say, oh, that's a great idea, let's put that on the agenda. It doesn't work. It's not fair. And it creates a kind of false expectation for us and for this agency.
Very well said. We have some eloquent people on this board.
I wanted to kind of capture some of what I've heard. We talked about, I mean, the thing that we keep saying, each of us is the strategic plan. And I believe the LA Office on Innovation is actually wrapping theirs up now. And where they're talking mission, they're talking vision, and they're really honing in and defining their strategic plan. I wonder if maybe we learn from them, and maybe some of our well-enabled Metro leadership could go and say, hey, you know, how can we benefit from some of the things that you guys are doing, because there's lots in common with what we have as our issues and what they're going through right now.
Funny you should say that, because Terrence, the head of the Office of Innovation, just went out to LA last week. So, and I know he's going to give Tom a download, and actually, probably at the board meeting, you should give all of us a download, or, you know, you guys decide what to do here. But yeah, he was just out there. That was sort of the first stop, because they have an Office of Innovation on which, if Terrence likes the way it's structured, is going to model ours.
We hear about it, but you actually saw some of it.
Yes. Yes.
So, great minds thinking alike. All right, well, we're covering a lot here. This is really, really helpful. Let me get my head back around what we're doing here, because everybody's made such excellent contributions. So I just want to cover, it's about 10 after 12. We don't have to soldier till 1. We can knock off any time, or we can stay till 1. But I want to be sure we get everybody's ideas, though. And I think we've certainly talked about goals our board should set and achieve. Is there anything anybody wants to add to the dialogue on that? Because I think we haven't really come up with several concrete goals. I would say the improvement to the existing service, the marketing, the more effective marketing of what the agency is doing and how effective we've been, the marketing to improve ridership, which I think is a really, really important thing, and then the regional transit.
And bus stops and sidewalks.
Yes, bus stops and sidewalks, very important.
So can I ask a question just procedurally, because this is sort of, you know, here's the big picture, the vision, but I think, and it kind of piggybacks on the strategic plan. You know, part of it would be, our objective or goals would be to help develop a regional transportation plan that might in fact lead to another bond referendum. But I would assume that there's going to be drilling down deeper into it, this strategic plan that sort of prioritizes short-term goals as well as long-term goals with, you know, a timeline with ways to be accountable, measurements. Is that sort of, what are the next steps, I guess is what I'm asking.
I think that's exactly it. And I was hoping that maybe anybody that wants to participate in the strategic plan should be on the subcommittee or the committee or however we structure it. I was hoping that Christoph, fresh off of his success with the new bus network, might be one of the people to take the laboring oar as a chair or co-chair of that effort. Anybody that wants to be a co-chair, let me know. And, you know, it may be a committee of the whole type of thing, where everybody on the board participates, or it may be a subcommittee where they bring ideas to the board, but we do need to get started, clearly. So, but yes, absolutely, I think those would be the logical steps.
And part of it is, as you and I have talked about, and staff is working on, you know, given the financial constraints of the agency over the next few years,
Right.
is figuring out how much money, if any, we have. So,
Right.
I mean, we've got to figure out how to pay for it. And also, if there are projects that we put in year 3 or in year 1 or year 2, that they are in fact sustainable by the agency. What are those future costs? That we're not just going in and Oh, it's a great idea, and then the next thing you know, the price tag is pretty.
Right. I think that that's really, really important. And the challenge will be, do we make a big wish list and then figure out what we can get accomplished, or where does the cost factor come in the process? So, that will be one of the challenges in developing this thing.
But yeah, and it needs, obviously you got to figure out how to pay for it. So it's got to be part of the strategic planning.
Yeah, and I don't want us to be hamstrung by the process of preparing a strategic plan. I don't want us to be hamstrung from seizing on initiatives that present themselves to us. For example, if in fact we were able to get funding from some source to extend one of the lines, the purple or green, to Hobby, well, obviously, that's something we would want to pursue. Not only is that in the 2003 referendum, but it just makes sense. And we don't want to say, oh, well, we don't have our regional plan, so we can't move on something when funding presents itself.
Well, and funding has to consider future debt service payments, too.
Correct.
All that has to
Correct.
be, that's what I mean in terms of sustainability. Because, we have our cash flow projections, and if in fact, the voters said, yeah, you can go for another $100 million or whatever, but we can't afford in the next 2 years the debt service on it, even if we could get the approval, it doesn't make sense. So that's where I think once we sort of figure out where we want to go, we've got to figure out the finances to back it up.
To Lex's point, right, is yes, there'll always be folks, the naysayers will always be there. We want a strategic plan, we want a regional transportation plan with incremental improvements and long-term improvements, and eventually goes to a referendum. And along those ways, I think it'd be really good for us to have some short-term goals that say, here are things that we can afford today at a affordable cost. Not that there's any money lying around, but are there ideas that we can put in place that significantly improve the ridership experience, that significantly makes it more convenient for our existing customers, or may encourage a few more additional customers? Because all of that, in my mind, leads towards building more support for a referendum for what we want to see in 2040. So, there are little things in my mind. If somebody's sitting on a park and ride bus for an hour every day, can we get them all Wi-Fi enabled for an incremental cost that they can pay for as part of their ticket that they pay? Are there ways for us to convince more folks that live inside the loop in areas that have every 6-minute connectivity like the number 82? We already have the Orange Link, Green Link downtown. Can we work with other management districts that might be willing to cooperate with us in getting feeder systems into our already established network? More people believe in the ridership experience at that point in time. We've all talked about reimagining the park and ride after the success of the reimagining the bus network. So we've got 29 park and ride facilities. Can we work with TxDOT to have more HOV type lanes, maybe at peak hours, may not be all day long? Looking at things like the relatively short term, relatively speaking, less capital investment. I also think every big box store, I think Houston had a mantra of pave the world. We've got a gazillion parking spots that are full only on Black Friday. Most other days they are empty. Can we do something with them that says, can you have a micro park and ride facility that feeds into our larger transit centers? These are all, I think, short-term improvements, not really strategic, it's almost tactical, but gets more ridership, betters the ridership experience. I talked to Chief Lambert, I think several years back, we used to have free bus rides for school students during the summer. Much like going back to Mayor Hoffheinz, right? Is if you can convince a 12, 13, 15-year-old to ride the transit system today, they're going to be a lot more willing to ride it when they get into the workforce.
Well, and plus they'll go home and tell their parents. I think back to, my kids being in lower school and about recycling and stuff, it was drilled into them in the school, so they come home and they're writing on us about, don't throw that away, that needs to go to recycling. Turn off your water when you're brushing your teeth. You have your 8-year-old telling you, and it's the same sort of thing. It's not just them, but it's telling their parents too. It's the low-hanging fruits. It's the things like if Bel Air or West U is putting in a new street, say, will you do the sidewalks and we'll put in a new shelter for you. You know, we'll maximize our dollars that way.
Sounds good. The bus shelter program is really something that warms my heart. And I've even wondered if we could tap into private foundation money to help us with that. We obviously need to coordinate with the city of Houston on the sidewalks and that sort of thing. But as Christoph has actually said, and some of the others of you have said this too, any new project in Houston should take into account bus shelters. And some of these private foundations are moving into underserved areas of Houston, building parks, etc. Bus shelters should be part of that. So I think there's a whole initiative there that could be something our board counts as a real triumph if we put all our heads together on how to get that done.
There's a photo that I just asked Tom to look up that we saw last week, and Sanjay had one here. I think that bus shelters, we have what we've had. Mm-hmm. I think starting to give companies the opportunities in those areas to market on those, because some of the ones we saw were digital. Mm-hmm. I think companies would jump on that in a heartbeat, because there's a lot of traffic, not just foot traffic and bike traffic, but just people at red lights that just look over. There is a great opportunity to get a lot of funding there from our private sector.
So there is a sign ordinance in the city that I think has an impact on that as it currently stands. Even if that's the case, still having an adopter shelter program,
which we have. In full disclosure,
in my previous capacity on a nonprofit board, Leadership Houston did a class project that adopted 4 bus shelters with local artists.
Oh, that's so cool.
Expanding that because all of that costs money, but expanding that with some kind of private sector participation would really, if that allows us to accelerate from 20% coverage with bus stops to 40, 50, 60, and eventually 100% coverage with bus shelters, that's something that every current rider will remember and thank the agency for every single day. And in the process, will become ambassadors for any referendum program that we ever put on the ballot.
That's excellent.
Before we jump too far ahead, and now I think we're kind of lost in a morass of vision and goals and tactical strategies and so on, so I can just throw these in and you can put them where they belong in the book. I think we may be missing an opportunity. Maybe we're taking advantage of it. I think we could, whatever we're doing now, we can do more of it. And that is we have a huge workforce in Metro. A lot of people who are committed to this organization, and not the least of whom are the bus drivers, the operators. And I think we can use those people more. And when I say use, I don't mean manipulate them. I mean engage them in the system more to help us with some of the relations that we're talking about. Some of them are models of that. Some of them are great. You want to get on their bus because you're going to get a tour if you want one. Others, I think, can help us more if we reinforce that. They can help the riders know better what the next stop is and what is at that next stop. Let them know we're making an extra stop here because there's some customers here waiting on the roadside. Let them get back to us and report. Hey, we just passed 2 bus stops where the trash can was turned over, or the machinery was in the way of wheelchair access to the stop. So I think we have opportunities without spending any more money, just patting people on the back, to improve our services, and we shouldn't. We're up here at a 30,000-foot level. I think there's a lot of things we can do down here on the ground that will make the system better for both the people who work and make it work, and those of us who use it.
Well, customer service should always be a I mean, at every level, for board members to every employee. We're in the customer service business. That's what it's all about. And I think this goes to you, Tom, but just making sure that every employee understands what the mission is and that they have a part in making it a good experience for the person. And that, you know, the other thing we haven't, or maybe it was talked about before I got here, but is making sure that it's a safe system, that people feel safe at any hour that it's operating, that they can use it. And that goes to our police force.
Well, I think that we're sort of covering everything at once on the list. So, and I think it's been very, very helpful. And in terms of on what committees and what projects you want to participate as a board member, if there's anything that you want to express here about that, feel free, or just let me know. But what I really wanted to make clear was anyone is welcome on any endeavor and any committee. There's no, barrier to your participating. One of the things about the Metro Board, as everybody's already learned, is it's a working board. And while we set policy and we don't run the agency, Chief Lambert does that, there's a lot of work to be done in the thought process of formulating the policy and in being ambassadors to the community and in every other aspect. And so don't be shy or hesitant about wanting to plunge yourself in anything. I'm sensitive to not making this more of a 24/7 job than it is for the board. And so in the committee assignments, people are not overloaded, but if you want to serve on a different committee that you're not on, please feel free to, or if you want to switch committees or that sort of thing.
So we now have a committee that incorporates planning. Are the agenda from this meeting, you will move automatically to that, or are you talking about creating another ad hoc committee to our structure?
The planning committee is really in charge of getting the person for our staff. We already have an excellent planning department, but what is the exact role that they're looking for?
I think Dr. Friedman's talking about the capital and strategic planning, the structure of that. The question is, would you run the strategic planning process back through that committee? I think that's the question.
Probably so. What do you think? Does that sound good?
It's good for me. I don't have to volunteer for another committee. Stay where I am.
You're going to get volunteered for any important thing that the agency does, and that's true of all the board. All right, well, let's just look. We've covered kind of our thoughts on Metro's core missions. We'll have to synthesize that and talk to you about a mission statement. What is your vision for Metro? We talked a lot about that. What goals do you think our board should set and achieve? We didn't really formulate a list, but I think we have a really good idea. Is there anything that anybody would want to add to that?
We talk about the mission, we talk about the vision, and what small steps. I think that we all agree that taking incremental steps to hit major goals is the better approach versus hitting a home run. Let's just get the first base, then the second. But we didn't on here speak specifically of the strategic plan, which captures kind of all of these together.
It does. My view is, well, now when you say strategic plan, do you mean for the agency or do you mean the regional transit plan?
The agency.
Okay, well, then what is the strategic plan for the agency?
That's the question.
Well, isn't it summarizing all of this and kind of putting it together in obtainable goals and objectives, timeline, and a way to pay for it? And part of, to me, the strategic plan is, in fact, developing a regional transportation network, plan, but there may be other things strategically that we want to do.
Yeah, I would say that enhancing our marketing effort further, also increasing or making the ridership experience much better on the existing transit we have. Those would be two aspects of it too.
Yeah, there's sort of, I think, a short term and a long term. Short term is what we can do with the money we have today. We've talked about enhancing what we have, marketing what we have, increasing our ridership, which would be sort of an outcome. And then the long term would be laying the plans for a regional, developing a regional transportation plan within the agency as well as with our partners and potential partners, and a timeline as well as financing model.
I like the idea of having options, frankly. And as we think about planning, as we think about going to the public to ask them to provide more resources, I think we would put ourselves in a strategically good position if we show them what the options are for the variable costs. And I do think we should have a vision for the future that includes skyways and driverless buses and everything else. And that there's a cost associated with that.
When you say skyways.
And that's one thread, but I do think we should also show a couple of other options based on current capability, given the resources that we have that we can predict, and let the public help us choose. They're going to pay for it.
I think last week, a couple of weeks back, I could be wrong, I think it's Atlanta. The voters voted to spend several $1 billion on elevated bike trails connecting multiple parts of the city. It's a cost, but it's a choice that the voters made. But if they don't know what the cost is, how are they going to make the choice? It's providing the long term as well as something that's near term that they know that'll benefit them. I mean, there are some things that we could do that hopefully I'll be retired by then. We won't see in the next 20, 30 years. But there are things that we also should see in the next 3, 5, 10, 20 years that folks will actually get to use. And those are the ones making the decision on whether they want to spend the money on it through a bond program.
But along those lines, if we can show the voter that, hey, you're not just asking me to pay for something that I'm not going to see for 40 years or 20 years. I mean, you're not going to sell a bond program unless they have something that, hey, I may get to see a benefit to it in the next 3 years or 5 years.
Well, item 6, board member requests for discussion of other initiatives or issues for further discussion. That's certainly a catch-all. What else does anybody want to say now that we're in this setting? Not that we can't do this again or devote some of our board meeting to following up, but
when we get into the strategic planning or whatever, I know staff probably already has lots of ideas on how all this is and what all they have been working on and such. But, a lot of times I think it is, what problem are you trying to solve? If you can say, what problem am I trying to solve and what is the best tool for it? What does a driverless bus provide that a drivered bus doesn't? I mean, does that make sense? Why, what tool? And then I think it would be really helpful. Maybe y'all can see it, but I struggle with figuring out the cost of different types of services. So, like park and ride, how much does that really cost the agency? Is there a way to do it more efficiently? How to improve it? I'm curious. Everybody sitting at this table, did anybody use Metro today? And why didn't they? It's not a bad thing that you didn't. You didn't because there was a reason. And that's the same thing that the public faces. So, I know for me, if my office was downtown, I would have ridden the bus today. But for me to get back over to 290, Uber's like $26. So it's more cost efficient for me to not. But anyways, those are the things I think we'll get into in the strategic part.
I think so too.
Here's the project manager in me. I mean, when I think Metro, it would be a lot easier to be more efficient if we had a clear strategic plan with a mission, with a vision, and here are the steps. Because when I come to a committee meeting or I come to the board meeting, I can say exactly, here's what I'm here to do. Here's what I'm here to accomplish. And that way, whenever we kind of start driving on the the outbounds, I can say, well, how does that align here? Because we agreed and there was consensus that we were here to make these differences. And it just, to me, gives inspiration, vigor, and just purpose. We're here to do this, and if we do this, then we've been successful because we can measure it and because it's clear.
Plus, I think it's good to have that in place for future boards. No board can bind a future board other than contracts, et cetera. But if you have a plan that's something that they can pick up and see, you're more likely to leave your thumbprint on the future.
I agree. Do we have other boards done a strategic plan? We talked about mission statement, and we don't have one of those. But is there a strategic plan that has been done in the past?
I think overall, there's never really, to my knowledge, and others can join in, really a strategic plan that says, this is what you're going to do in the first year of a business plan, this is what you're going to do in year 2, this is what you're going to do in year 4. That's clearly something the agency needs. Now, we have done a plan that fits into the HGAC plan, but I'm not aware of any particular strategic plan that says, here's the mission, here's the value, here's your mission, your vision, your value statements, and oh, by the way, this is what you're going to measure to get accomplished.
Maybe the best thing that's come out of this retreat is we need a strategic plan.
It makes it so much easier for all of us because at the end of the day, we're all going to be measured. How successful were you? Were you a lame duck or were you progressive? Did you think about the future and the needs of the future? If we can document that and we can say we went off of something clear and it's a living document. Issues happen, unknowns happen, and you adjust it. At least when we can go back like you did on your report card and say, here was the scope, here's what we did.
Yes.
And right now we kind of show up and there are issues, good issues. Harrisburg takes a lot of that time, but if we were clear on scope, how are we pushing the ball forward and what exactly is in scope and not in scope? Because we get a lot of distractions from a lot of issues.
Madam Chair, there's one comment I'd make too, just to kind of further support that. There's an old saying that people will deliver what you measure. And if you have a clear understanding of what it is you're measuring, then you will have a deliverable that people will meet. And I think that's very important for the agency and the long term going forward as well.
And I always tell my kids, if you don't know where you're going, you're not going to get there.
We got a lot of colloquialism.
Yeah, these are good.
And recognizing that strategic plan will have things that are tangible, brick and mortar, and other items that we will put in place or start moving the needle now, that may not benefit the agency and the public entirely until 20 years from now, because if you're thinking about a paradigm shift in how our funding streams go towards transportation versus mobility projects, you start moving the needle now, that money is not going to be available until significantly down the road. And I think one thing as we look at marketing, you made the statement about transportation, highways are also subsidized. The one thing that was really enlightening to me was if you look at the multiple things that Metro provides, multiple services, the level of subsidy and the cost to the agency. The few times that I've gone out and spoken to folks, I just throw it out there, say, anybody want to opine on it? And most folks don't completely grasp that Park and Ride is probably the highest subsidy, of course, not taking Metro Lift into consideration, compared to other services that the agency offers. How does that number compare to the subsidy on highways, not toll roads, on highways? having that in the toolbox as we have conversations, I think will be very beneficial. Right? I can go on and on. I'm going to stop with that for now.
That's great. It is. Well, does anybody have anything else they want to say? Today, we can reconvene at some point, maybe on down the road, when we have a draft of a strategic plan.
So we're going to get this sort of all written up and back to
Yes.
us.
Yes, we are.
Just a couple of things. First, I appreciate the chairman's leadership in putting this together. This is a rare privilege for us, I think, to have this time to sit and have. And frankly, I would encourage more of this. I feel like we have a higher quality interaction than we do when we're sitting behind the next desk, and we're able to really share our feelings about things. In those board meetings, obviously, they're constrained by an agenda that requires us to consider certain legal actions and so forth. Here, we're able to share ideas, learn from one another. I've learned more than I've given here today, and that will encourage me to come back next time. So I think the more informal setting is a good one, and it can be very productive. I appreciate that. I also want to say how much I appreciate the staff support here at Metro, not only for this occasion, but I've been a member of this board now for about 2 months. And during that time, they have been almost intuitive in terms of thinking of things that I might need, from as small a thing as a straw at the soft drink bar, to moving a switch so that I can use it to get in and out of a door. And I really do appreciate that. I think it reflects well on our agency's intent to be of high quality service, not only to those of us as board members, but to the public generally. And finally, I want to thank Jerome and his staff for helping to edit down that long and boring video that you all might have had to watch had it not been for the good work of their staff. So thank you.
Well, thank you so very much for expressing that gratitude, because it's all very well deserved by everyone to whom it's directed. Last night we were working on the slideshow, which was a short slideshow, but the software froze up and glitched, and it kind of became the equivalent of the Harrisburg Project. And we were all we couldn't believe it. We were watching Gabe move something, and it just wouldn't do it. It was the problem was that it had frozen up. And so finally I realized the best thing for me to do would be to absent myself and let people do their jobs without my looking over their shoulder, which I did, and it all went swimmingly well. But a lot of staff preparation went into this, and I so appreciate it. And I'm reminded again of what a joy it's been as chairman to be back at an agency with such top quality folks. So, shall we adjourn? Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.